Matthew chapter 17, verses 22 through 27. It's interesting. This text contains one of the more curious miracles in all of the New Testament. And actually, I just can't remember who, but 2 or 3 weeks ago, a church member texted or emailed and said, in all my years in church, I've never heard anyone talk about this particular miracle. So I don't know if it was one of you. I hope so, because now you'll be able to hear someone talk about it. But the miracle of the coin in the mouth of the fish. Matthew 17. As they were gathering in Galilee, Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day." And they were greatly distressed. When they came to Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma tax went up to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the tax?" He said, "Yes." And when he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, "What do you think, Simon?" By the way, that's always a warning to be careful when Jesus says that. "What do you think, Simon? From whom do kings of the earth take toll or tax? From their sons or from others?" And when he said, "From others," Jesus said to him, "Then the sons are free. However, not to give offense to them, go to the sea and cast a hook and take the first fish that comes up, and when you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for me and for yourself." It's a fascinating passage. We have folks in our church, I know of at least one here, Ronnie, and probably others of you here. Lewis is a world traveler. He might have been to Israel, who have been to Israel and seen Peter's house. Any of you seen Peter's house in Capernaum? I'm just curious. Ronnie, you have been there. I know Dale. Dale's not here this evening, but normally Dale we'll talk about that as well. Peter's house, traditionally thought to be the house of Peter, now has a church built atop it, right, with a glass floor. You can, my journey with the house has been through the Google machine. But Ronnie's been there again, and you can go and look at all of this. Fred Baltz writes about the excavation of this. In the 19th century, the abandoned site of Capernaum was recognized and recovered from Bedouins. Excavations began in 1905 of Capernaum. Franciscans, Vandelin von Binden and Gaudenzio Orfali, continued the work. The excavations uncovered the ruins of a synagogue and an octagonal church that had been destroyed by the early 7th century. Now, within the church, they find a central room that is older than the other portions of the church, the synagogue. It's that central room that appears to be a home, a house. There's graffiti on the wall that may say Peter and may not, like everything else like that. It's people argue about it. But I want you to hear one interesting fact about Peter's house. The central room of the octagonal church had been plastered, replastered, and painted with intricate designs remarkable and unique in Capernaum. Found on pieces of plaster were prayer expressions like, quote, "Lord Jesus, help your servant," and "Christ have mercy." There is debate about whether Peter's name actually appears in the graffiti. It became clear, he writes, that the use of the central room had changed with the passing years. The lowest level, which in archaeology is the oldest, the lowest level still held evidence from daily home life. Listen to what they found: lamps, coins, cooking pots, and fish hooks. They have found fish hooks from 2,000 years ago in a room that they think is Peter's house. Now, if you're familiar with the New Testament at all, that's really cool. Peter was a fisherman, and fishing kind of hovers and is always in the vicinity of Peter in the Gospels. He's a fisherman. Jesus calls him away from his fishing enterprise. Jesus calls him to become a fisher of men. Peter will return, at least for a time, after the crucifixion of Jesus, to fishing. He will meet Jesus again on the shore, and he will once again resume his great ministry as a fisher of men, one of the great leaders of the church. But in the midst of all of this, we have this curious little story about a time when Peter was instructed by Jesus to go fishing. And interestingly, this story is connected with the paying of taxes. But even more interestingly, it's not just about taxes. So let's see what we've got here. The story begins, number one, with Jesus being confronted with a law. Jesus is confronted with a law. Look at verse 22 of Matthew 17. As they were gathering in Galilee, and Capernaum was his home base there in Galilee, Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day." And they were greatly distressed. One of the things you notice in the Gospels is that as Jesus draws closer to the cross, he begins to talk more about it. He's preparing them for the trial to come. Just the trial of the crucifixion itself, and then what will happen in the aftermath of it. They will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day, Jesus said, and they were greatly distressed. And then immediately the text pivots to this strange scene about taxes. When they came to Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma tax went up to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the tax?" He said he does. Now, it may sound like the gospel has been written in a haphazard way. You go from, think about our journey through Matthew 17 so far. Mount of Transfiguration, they come down from the mount. Last Wednesday we saw the child possessed by the devil who threw him into Caesar's. The disciples couldn't cast him out. Jesus cast the demon out. Now we come to a pronouncement of the coming crucifixion, followed immediately by a confrontation about taxes. Now, it may look like there's no connection between an announcement of crucifixion and taxes, but just think about it. This isn't a political Roman tax. This is a religious tax. This is a temple tax. So I would just like to suggest that this is prophetic, even the organization of it. If you go from Jesus saying, "I'm going to be crucified," to immediately the tax collectors for the temple saying, "Does he not pay the temple tax?" You've got their crucifixion and religious authority and establishment side by side. That's significant because at least in some part, Jesus' crucifixion was all bound up with his alleged violations of the religious law and politically of the political law when they tried to appeal to Pontius Pilate or to others that he was making himself out to be a threat to Caesar. So we go from this announcement of crucifixion to this statement about taxes. Does he not pay taxes? Now, this tax is rooted, as we'll see in Exodus chapter 30. It was originally the tabernacle tax, and it was the tax that Jewish men 20 years old and older paid every year for temple upkeep. It was like kind of the closest thing you might have to a church tax. Now, you might think, well, Baptists have no concept of that. But back in the day, we did have a concept of that. Before there was anything like professional clergy, whatever that is, the deacons of Baptist churches back in the 17th century, 18th century, on into the 1800s, the deacons would go to the church members and raise up the pastor's salary every year. You'd get a knock on the door. You could read the old minutes of these. The old deacons would say, "All right, we got to pay the pastor." And he might get a chicken or a sack of potatoes or a little bit of money, et cetera, et cetera. People still pay pastors in food sometime. So, just saying, they'll come by like just drop off like food offerings. Every time you'll come out in the office, you're like, there's a whole pie sitting there. Same people that complain about this bring pies. Like, be careful with that. Stop bringing pies, but don't. Number 2, Jesus reveals the new reality of life in the kingdom. So Peter, if you read it, is asked the question. Peter answers the question. And then Peter is questioned by Jesus. And one of the things that's interesting about this, I just noted by way in passing, is that once again, Peter is asked 3 questions. You ever noticed how many times Peter is asked questions in groups of 3s? Yeah. You think of two very famous ones, the most famous, the denials. Probably the second most famous at the end of John, Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Here, Jesus asks him three questions again. So watch this. Verse 25. Peter says yes. And when he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, what do you think, Simon? It's the first question. Now, it's interesting that he calls him Simon. It was in Matthew 16 that he got the name Peter. But Jesus kind of goes back and forth on this. You can read into that or not. But it's almost like, let me see what you say here to determine whether or not you get Peter, out of me again. So, what do you say, Simon? What do you think? From whom do kings of the earth take toll or tax? Question number 2. Question number 3, from their sons or from others? Meaning, do powerful people tend to put burdens on their children or on strangers? Do the kings tax their own sons or others? Peter's answer is prompt and precise when he said, from others. And by the way, that's true. There's a fundamental principle about the way the world works there. The children of the powerful are oftentimes given a real pass, right? It's others. People don't often send their own kids to war. They send other people's kids to war, tax other people's kids, all of this. Peter answers correctly, from others. And then Jesus says, then the sons are free. I love this because it's just gloriously kind of provocative, and it can be read on two levels. On one level, Jesus is asking a political question. Who do kings tax? Their own children or others? Peter says others. And then Jesus says, oh, so the sons are free. On the lower level, the bottom floor level, that's a geopolitical statement, isn't it? Okay, so the sons of kings are free from the burdens that kings impose on those who are not their sons. Got it. But he's clearly saying something else. Who is the son of the king who is really free? Jesus and all who enter the family of God with him. You've got to read that last statement with a wink, I think. Let's go back and take another run at it. What do you think, Simon? From who do kings of the earth take toll or tax, from their sons or from others? Simon, from others, and Jesus, then the sons are free. I'm terrible at winking. As if to say, do you get my point? What's the point? There is a sense in which the child of God, as a citizen of the kingdom of God, really is free from earthly matters. In just a moment, he's going to say, but so that we don't offend them, let's pay our taxes. Jesus is not calling us to lawlessness. He's calling us to perspective. Remember that you are part of the kingdom, and on earth, whereas the children of the wealthy and the powerful get a pass, in the kingdom, you are the sons of God. You have a freedom that no one can imagine. We'll pay our taxes and do our duty and be good citizens and all of this. But understand that the sons are free. I'm proposing to you that he's simply saying here what he says in John 8:36. If the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. And isn't it true? I want to argue that this is kingdom theology, that Jesus is saying, hey, we'll do this, but don't lose perspective. Reality has now changed. You've been born again. You're part of the kingdom. I am the son, and therefore I am free because the sons of kings are free, and I have set you free. So we don't despair here. We don't lose hope. Pay your taxes with a wink and a nod. Another way that Jesus put it elsewhere is like this. Okay, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, but render unto God what belongs to God, which is a gloriously subversive statement, because what belongs to God? Everything. Everything. The Son has set you free. I think that's hope for us, man. I think that's a beautiful way to live life. To be good, responsible citizens, pay your taxes, serve, mow your grass, right, John? Got to mow my grass. But understand that you were made for more than this, right?
Water your lawn.
Water your lawn. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, all of that. Number 3, we also see here a miracle of accommodation and of prophecy. Watch verse 27. Jesus immediately says this, however, not to give offense to them, go to the sea and cast a hook and take the first fish that comes up. I think I'm right about this. Be glad to be corrected on it if I'm not. I think this is the only time that Peter uses a hook. He uses a net every other time when he fishes. But hooks and nets were both used in the first century. That was a very common thing. Probably if you were involved in industry trying to get a big haul, obviously you'd use nets. But here this is like, hey, just go down there. This is a precision strike. You take a hook and throw it in and take the first fish that comes up, and when you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for yourself. Okay, I want to call this a miracle of accommodation, meaning that Jesus accommodates the tax collector. He's willing to do what's asked of him. Keep in mind that in the description of the early church in the book of Acts, Acts 2:46 and 47, we read this, day by day, attending the temple together, breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God, listen to this, praising God and having favor with all the people. The early church had favor with all the people, and the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. The early church was a law-abiding community to the extent that they could be so and not violate their conscience against God. You've got to put law-abiding in quotes, because the same group that paid taxes and prayed for their kings also were willing to be killed by the state when the state demanded that they offer incense to Caesar. They refused to do it. When the law lapsed into idolatry, the church said no. But so far as they could obey the law rightly and maintain their witness for Christ, they did so. You've probably met people like this. I'm aware of 2 cases of ministers who, on the basis of their understanding of the kingdom of God, refused to pay taxes. They just stopped paying taxes. Creatively, they said, we answer to God, not to man. Predictably, they both got in really big trouble. I just want to say I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding. Jesus paid taxes here. I mean, it's pretty clear. Now you can say, well, that's the temple tax. Whatever. It's very clear that in the life of the early church, they paid their taxes. I don't want to get lost in that, but let me just say, is there ever a time to not pay? You know, you think about Henry David Thoreau and Walt. You know, Thoreau spent time in jail for not paying, what was it, $8 or something like that. He refused to pay taxes over something. Yeah, I think there's a matter of individual conscience in specific cases where you might think that paying something violates your conscience as a Christian. But by and large, keep in mind that in the early church, the scriptures tell us to pray for kings, rulers, and authorities. And at that time, the kings, rulers, and authorities were actually killing Christians. Meaning the point isn't pray for good government. Pray when the government's acting good. No, he clearly told them, pray when the government's acting bad. Don't you be bad and don't do bad things. There's a time to say no. And for 2,000 years, Christians have tried to figure out that algorithm. What's the proper time to oppose your own government? But let me just say this. As a general rule, we are supposed to be law-abiding, tax-paying citizens of the land of our residency, right? We're supposed to do this. But there's something deeper here, and I want to share this and then we'll talk. I think there's something prophetic happening here, and I don't want to read this allegorically, but I want to just challenge us to think about this. I think the first thing that's prophetic about this whole episode is there's a note of atonement in it. What I mean is this. Go back to Exodus 30 and listen to the language of how this tax was instituted. Here's what it says, Exodus 30:11. The Lord said to Moses, when you take the census of the people of Israel, and this tax was tied to the census, then each shall give a ransom for his life to the Lord when you number them, that there be no plague among them when you number them. Each one who is numbered in the census shall give this, half a shekel, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. The shekel is 20 gerahs, half a shekel as an offering to the Lord. Everyone who is numbered in the census from 20 years old and upward shall give the Lord's offering. This is the Old Testament foundation of this offering, of this tax. The rich shall not give more, and the poor shall not give less than the half shekel when you give the Lord's offering to make atonement for your lives. Meaning everyone pays the exact same thing on this temple tax. At the time, a tabernacle tax. You shall take the atonement money from the people of Israel and shall give it for the service of the tent of meeting, that it may bring the people of Israel to remembrance before the Lord, so as to make atonement for your lives. So what's happening here? Why would the fact that they were included in a census mean that they need to pay a ransom price so that a plague won't come upon Israel? There's a guy named Robert Alter. He's a fascinating Old Testament scholar. He's translated the entire Old Testament. And he made an observation about this that was amazing. He said not just Israel, but people in Mesopotamia at that time had a deep fear of being counted. And they don't quite know why, but there was a general idea that if you counted large groups of people, bad things might happen to those large groups. Kid you not. So censi, when you took a census, it carried with it a sense of foreboding. This is why he says, when you take the census, everyone has to pay something for their life so a plague doesn't hit us. It was kind of a popular mindset. They think it may have something to do with the fact that if you had a large group of people, the way ancient people thought, if you had a large group of people and you counted them precisely, it was almost drawing attention to malevolent spirits and forces to attack them. I know that sounds bizarre to us, but Alter points out, for instance, that when there's a census taken in 2 Samuel 24, immediately a plague, it triggers a plague. You can go back in the ancient world and look. Lots of times when a census is taken, something terrible happens. So that's a curiosity. But think about this. Jesus is willing to make a payment so that something terrible doesn't happen in the minds of people 2,000 years ago. Jesus is willing to pay this tax. I'm saying that that's prophetic. Jesus, I'm not saying thought that, but people thought that. That's what was behind the temple tax. So first of all, there's a note of atonement. Exodus 30 uses the word atonement. Jesus is willing to make a payment so that destruction does not come upon his followers. What was he just talking to them about before all of this? The cross. I'm saying that it's foreshadowing the fact that Jesus will make a payment on the cross that will save all who trust in him. But there's one last thing that's really fascinating. It's not just atonement. It's substitution. Who does Jesus pay taxes for? Himself and Peter. Jesus says in this strange little episode, I will pay the price for me and for you. Jesus covers the debt of Peter so that Peter will not have to cover it himself. My point is simply this. In all kind of ways, big and small, Jesus is trying to get the disciples mentally, spiritually ready for the cross. He needs them to start thinking. A price has to be paid. And this is about taxes. That's all it is. But I think Jesus is using even this to say, prepare yourself. I'll pay the price, and I'll pay it for you as well. I think these were little moments that the disciples would have looked back on and thought, isn't that interesting? Jesus is always kind of paying the price. And then he goes to the cross and he pays the ultimate price for us all. So I love this. Beautiful, glorious statement. What about the fish? Well, I'll just say this. It's not the first time God's done a miracle with a fish, right? That goes into the Old Testament, doesn't it? He once did a miracle with a great big fish. Yeah, and there are more times in the New Testament that he does so as well. Some people have pointed out that the story doesn't actually say that Peter went and did it. It doesn't actually record that it happened. But I think that's nonsense. There's no reason in the story to think that it didn't. Jesus told him to do it. He's very precise. It would be very strange for Jesus to have said that. Peter starts to go and say, oh, I'm just kidding. He reaches behind his ear and pulls out a coin. It's not like your granddad. No, I think there's a reason for that. And I think the reason personally is this, and I want to hear your thoughts. I think he got the coin out of the fish to demonstrate that he's Lord of heaven and earth, that he has power and authority even over the fishes of the deep, that he's the creator. I think it's a little nod to Genesis. I think it's a statement of his sovereignty. And I think it's another way of saying this. We'll pay the taxes, but remember this. There's a power above the earthly powers. There is a king above earthly kings. And that king can actually tell the fishes to come up and you'll find coins in their mouth. Last statement, I promise. I love the fact that it's a creative, kind of funny miracle. I think it's glorious. I try to think about Peter's face. Do what? And then when Peter pulled the fish up and looked in the mouth of the fish, for a brief moment, his eyes met that fish's eyes. And they both knew this Jesus is something totally different, something above anything we could have imagined.